as Vladimir Putin has had two sets of very interesting meetings. One was with his agriculture minister, Nikolai Patrushev. Now, Nikolai Patrushev, I should say, is an interesting, Dmitry Patrushev. Dmitry Patrushev, the agriculture minister, is, I understand, the brother of Nikolai Patrushev, who is the secretary of Russia's Security Council. So this is a pretty formidable team of the Patrushev brothers. One runs Russian intelligence, the other runs Russian agriculture. Both are very highly placed officials in Russia's government, very close to Putin himself. Anyway, Patrushev gave a glowing story about the state of Russian agriculture to Putin. He said that last year Russia achieved a record in terms of food production. He said that food production is now much higher than it was in Soviet times. And he has recently also given another statement to the effect that food production is still increasing. And he says that Russia is self-sufficient in every category, practically every category of food, and will be fully self-sufficient very soon. And of course, it's in a strong position to export food as well. Now, I haven't been to Russia again for some years now. Last time I was there was in February 2018, but I can confirm that. My experience in Russia was that, contrary to what many people imagine, this is no longer a country with food shortages. It is, on the contrary, a country of food abundance. And moreover, not only is food abundant in Russia, but it is actually pretty diverse in its nature and of very high quality. Anyway, that's all I would say. That's an anecdotal view. And I do get the sense that certainly since 2014, when the Russians imposed counter-sanctions, agricultural counter-sanctions on the West in response to the sanctions that had been imposed on them. But anyway, since 2014, I do get the sense that Russian agriculture has been in a consistent upswing. And for all I know, Dmitry Patrushev's claim that it is in effect in a virtuous cycle, that every improvement leads to further improvement and that output will continue to grow. I have no reason to doubt that. That does seem to be true. The other meeting was with the Russian government, and it was intended primarily to discuss the Northern Sea route. This is the sea route over the Arctic, along the Arctic coast, and there was a huge amount of discussion about that and the progress of it and its future and all of those things. But anyway, Putin used this meeting, which brought together many Russian officials, including the finance minister, Anton Siluanov, the industry minister, Denis Manturov, the agricultural minister again, Dmitry Patrushev, and of course the deputy governor of the central bank, Sergei Belov, and the prime minister, Mikhail Mishustin. They were all there, and they discussed an overview of the situation in the Russian economy. And they confirmed that the annualized rate of inflation is indeed 2.3%. Patrushev, again, this is Dmitry Patrushev, again reiterated that agriculture is on an upswing. Manturov said that there are still some areas in the industrial sector that are still lagging, that are still having problems. He didn't mention the car industry. He was actually asked a question about the car industry, and I noticed that he skipped an answer to that. My understanding, my sense is that this is the slowest industry to recover because it was the industry that depended most on Western-produced subcomponents. But anyway, he said that many industrial sectors are now reviving and are recording strong growth. And on the question of electronics, remember the question of the question that was asked about the state of the high-tech sector in Russia caused by the so-called brain drain. Well, Mercouris said that growth in the electronics sector last year was 22.5%. Now, that is just one of those figures that's thrown out. We don't know what it means. We don't quite know what the electronics sector means. I mean, does this mean that microchip production has increased, for example, or does it just mean that simpler electronic goods are being produced in larger numbers? I mean, it's just a ballpark figure. It doesn't mean very much. But nonetheless, it does seem as if the electronic sector is achieving growth. And to my knowledge, again, Russia does produce some pretty sophisticated electronic goods. I've discussed this question of microchips many times, and I've explained why I think this is an overstated and misunderstood issue. The other thing that came across from this discussion is that real incomes in Russia now do seem to be rising. Well, this is a long discussion about economics, and interestingly enough, and perhaps unsurprisingly, the only part of it that I noticed any part of the Western media picked up on were certain comments made by the finance minister, Anton Siluanov. And Putin asked Mr. Siluanov, we have 2.3% inflation. This means that our budget revenues must also be at appropriate level. Is that right? Now, the point Putin is making, is that for inflation to be just at 2.3%, it must mean that the budget is under control, because one of the fastest ways in Russia that inflation would rise, this is actually what really happened in the 1980s, that the Soviet government, after Gorbachev became leader, engaged in very heavy unbudgeted spending, which resulted in a flood of money pouring into the economy, which is not backed by goods and not backed by budget revenues, and that was what caused inflation to surge. We've seen something similar in the United States in the first year of the Biden administration, by the way. But anyway, so Putin is asking, look, we've only got 2.3% inflation, so that must mean that the situation with the budget is okay. And Siluanov responded, Mr. President, yes, indeed, our non-oil and gas revenues are growing as planned. That is, we expect that there may be a small surplus in non-oil and gas revenues at the end of this year. However, the problem is with oil and gas revenues. For now, we can see that considering the current situation and all these discounts, they're lagging behind. And of course, there is the issue of expenditures. We see that now, today, literally today, we have fulfilled the plan for annual revenue to about 30%, and we fulfilled the annual expenditure for the year by 39%. Therefore, we have a temporary imbalance which should be leveled out as we further proceed with budget execution. So what Siluanov is saying is that the Russian government front-loaded its spending to the start of this year. So it's already spent 40% of the money it had budgeted for in terms of spending, whilst only receiving 30% of the revenues. And this has created an imbalance, and that imbalance has been affected to some extent by the fact that oil and gas revenues have been lower because of lower oil and gas prices and because of the fact that Russia has had to give discounts to countries like China and India for its oil and gas. But Siluanov thinks this is all going to be resolved. He says this is a temporary imbalance and it should be levelled out as we further proceed with budget execution. In other words, he anticipates that spending will start to fall, relatively speaking, from this point on, because so much of the spending was front-loaded, and by contrast, he expects that income will gradually start to increase and the two will balance out. Well, that's how I read Siluanov's statements. The Financial Times, for example, simply read them as him admitting to the existence of problems. Anyway, so overall, it seems to me that Putin and his officials are giving us the same picture as Larry Elliott did in The Guardian. Russia has seen off the sanctions challenge. Its economy is growing. The real living standards are rising. Industrial production is rising. There are still problems in the economy. Non-oil and gas revenues are also rising. There's going to be a surplus there. There's less coming in terms of oil and gas than in other years, but Siluanov seems confident that this is going to be resolved. And in fact, the latest budget figures seem to bear that out. So overall, the Russians are secure or feel secure in terms of their economic direction. And I'm going to suggest that this, for them, is the single most important thing they've achieved so far in this conflict. To repeat again, go back to what Larry Elliott said. This is essentially, first and foremost, an economic war. The very fact that the Western powers are talking about tightening sanctions is proof that the sanctions have failed. And Putin and his officials have given us some of the figures. Well, that's me for the day. More from me soon. Look forward to you joining me again. Just to remind you, you can find all our programs on our various platforms: Locals, Rumble, BitChute, Odyssey, Rockfin and Telegram. Don't forget that you can support us via Patreon and Subscribestar. Links under this video. Check out our shop where we have all our amazing merchandise. And last but not least, if you've liked this video, please tick the like button and check your subscription to this channel. Thank you again. More from me soon, and have a very good day.